Did you know some states in America have arguments so strange they make your family Thanksgiving drama look like a friendly tea party? Across this country, bitter rivalries stretch back decades, even centuries, fueled by everything from misplaced monuments to stolen cheeses. We're not talking about classic sports feuds or political clashes. No, these are the bizarre, often forgotten battles where states went to war over lobsters, built fences just to spite their neighbors, or even tried to tax each other's sunshine. And today, we're diving into 29 of the most jaw-dropping state rivalries in American history, stories so wild, you'll wonder how they didn't end up in your high school textbooks. Picture this: two states locked in a heated battle over a bridge that technically belonged to both of them. Instead of sharing like reasonable adults, they parked trucks at either end to block traffic, turning it into the world's most petty parking lot. Or how about the time one state tried to claim an entire lake by sending militia to chase off fishermen from their rival? These aren't scenes from a satirical comedy. They're real moments in history where states went full soap opera over borders, bragging rights, and sometimes just pure stubbornness. What makes these rivalries so fascinating isn't just the absurdity. It's what they reveal about the quirky, competitive spirit of America itself. Behind every lobster war and fence-cutting feud is a story of pride, identity, and the lengths people will go to prove their corner of the map matters most. So whether you're rooting for the underdog or just here for the drama, buckle up. By the end of this, you'll never look at state lines the same way again. Ever heard of a war where the only casualty was a sheriff's pride? Welcome to the Toledo War, a showdown between Michigan and Ohio that turned a sliver of swampy land into one of America's most ridiculous border disputes. Back in 1835, both states were convinced this muddy strip, barely wider than a football field, belonged to them. Michigan, still a territory at the time, sent militiamen to assert their claim, while Ohio's governor called out his own troops. The two sides postured, shouted, and even arrested a few unlucky officials, but not a single shot was fired. The closest thing to battle damage, a Michigan sheriff got stabbed with a penknife during a tavern brawl. Here's where it gets juicy. Congress finally stepped in and brokered a deal that felt like a parental compromise between squabbling siblings. Ohio kept Toledo, which seemed like a win until you realized the city was basically a mosquito-infested bog at the time. Meanwhile, Michigan walked away with something far more valuable: the entire Upper Peninsula. At first, they sulked about it, calling it a barren wasteland. But fast forward to today, and the UP is a treasure trove of forests, waterfalls, and copper mines. Ohio got swampland, Michigan got paradise. The rivalry didn't end there. For over a century, Michigan and Ohio turned their feud into a cultural Cold War. Michigan fans still boo Ohio State with extra venom, and some Wolverines refuse to say the word Ohio, referring to it only as that state down south. Even the state's official documents sniped at each other. Michigan's early maps deliberately drew the border wrong, just to spite their neighbors. It's a classic case of petty pride outlasting the original fight, proving that in America, even the dumbest disputes can leave a legacy. Sometimes the sweetest things turn into the stickiest conflicts. Just ask Missouri and Iowa, who once nearly went to war over honey. In 1839, these neighbors got into a spat so absurd it could only be called the Honey War. The fight started over a fuzzy border line drawn decades earlier, when Missouri claimed a strip of land that Iowa considered its own. Tensions simmered until Missouri officials decided to make a point by sending men to chop down 3 precious bee trees, their trunks heavy with honeycombs. It wasn't just about the honey, though. This was a territorial power play, a way of saying, this land is ours and we'll take even the bees to prove it. Iowa wasn't about to let that slide. The governor threatened to call out the militia, and suddenly, both sides were posturing like they were ready for battle over a few gallons of golden syrup. Locals joked that the only thing thicker than the honey was the tension. For months, the standoff dragged on, with sheriffs arresting each other's tax collectors and farmers nervously eyeing the contested trees still standing along the border. It was less a war and more a very public game of chicken, one that could have turned messy if cooler heads hadn't prevailed. Eventually, the U.S. Supreme Court stepped in like a frustrated parent breaking up a playground fight. Their solution split the difference. The final border line they drew in 1849 gave Missouri a sliver of land but left Iowa with most of what it wanted. As for the honey, no records show who got the last jar, but the real prize was bragging rights. To this day, the honey war lives on in local legends, with Iowans ribbing their southern neighbors about the time they threw a fit over some bees. It's a reminder that in America, even the smallest stakes can spark the pettiest fights, especially when pride's on the line. Sometimes history's biggest standoffs start with the smallest provocations, like a hungry pig and a patch of potatoes. That's exactly what happened in 1859, when an American farmer on San Juan Island, a rocky patch of land between Washington Territory and British-controlled Canada, spotted a black hog rooting through his vegetable garden. The pig belonged to a British settler, but the farmer didn't see a neighbor's pet, he saw a trespasser. So he did what any fed-up homesteader would do, he shot it. And just like that, the most absurd international crisis in North American history, the pig war, was underway. What should have been a simple dispute over livestock quickly spiraled into a geopolitical showdown. British authorities demanded compensation. The American farmer refused, arguing the pig had invaded his land. Tempers flared, and soon both sides were calling in reinforcements. The British sent 3 warships bristling with cannons. The Americans responded with infantry troops. Before long, nearly 500 soldiers were glaring at each other across the island's grassy fields, muskets loaded, fingers twitching near triggers, all over a single dead pig. The absurdity wasn't lost on the men stationed there. One American officer wrote home that they were prepared to fight for a prize not worth $5. Here's the kicker: despite all the posturing, not a single shot was fired in anger. The standoff dragged on for months, with both sides too proud to back down but too sensible to start a war over pork. Soldiers passed the time playing cricket and trading jokes across the makeshift border. Eventually, word reached Washington and London, where officials were mortified to learn their armies were one squeal away from a bloodbath. Diplomats hastily brokered a deal, a joint military occupation of the island until the border could be settled peacefully. It took another 12 years, but in 1872, an international arbitrator finally awarded the San Juan Islands to the United States. The real winner, the pig, or at least its legacy. Today, San Juan Island hosts a national historical park where visitors can see the original farm site, now commemorated with a plaque. Locals joke that it's the only war where the only casualty was the one who started it. And while the US and UK moved on, the pig war remains a hilarious reminder that even the mightiest empires can be humbled by something as simple as a farmer's bad temper and a pig's empty stomach. In the rugged northern reaches of California and Oregon, frustration over neglect from their state capitals brewed into something far more dramatic, a full-blown secessionist movement. By 1941, residents of these remote counties had reached their breaking point. Crumbling roads, spotty mail service, and a sense of being forgotten fueled talk of rebellion. But this wasn't just grumbling over coffee at the general store. These folks were serious enough to declare themselves a brand new state, Jefferson. The rebellion kicked off with a symbolic act of defiance that could have been ripped from a Wild West script. Armed men set up roadblocks along Highway 99, stopping cars to hand out pamphlets announcing their independence. One miner, wielding a hunting rifle for dramatic effect, even proclaimed their grievances to startled travelers. The newly minted State of Jefferson had its own flag, a gold pan stamped with 2 bold X's, representing how the region felt double-crossed by Sacramento and Salem. Newspapers as far away as New York picked up the story, painting the scene as equal parts comedy and insurrection. Then history intervened. Just weeks after Jefferson's ragtag government issued their proclamation, Japanese forces bombed Pearl Harbor. Overnight, the nation's attention and priorities shifted. The would-be rebels, many of them proud patriots, shelved their plans to focus on the war effort. But the spirit of Jefferson never fully died. To this day, you'll still see that double-crossed gold pan on bumper stickers and barns across the region. Some counties still hold symbolic Jefferson State votes, and a few true believers even issue mock license plates. What started as a protest against potholes became a lasting symbol of frontier stubbornness, a reminder that in America, even failed rebellions can leave a mark. Water rights might sound like a dry topic unless you're talking about the time Colorado and Nebraska nearly turned irrigation into an interstate Cold War. By the 1980s, farmers in both states were locked in a battle over the South Platte River, with Nebraska accusing its neighbor of basically sucking the river dry before it could cross the state line. But this wasn't just bureaucratic finger-wagging. Nebraska lawmakers fired the first shot with a hilariously petty resolution, officially dubbing Colorado's actions the Great Corn Robbery and claiming their cornfields were being starved by upstream bandits. Colorado's response, a mix of eye rolls and defiance. One lawmaker even joked that Nebraska's real problem was poor water management and a flair for drama. But things escalated when Nebraska farmers rolled up to the border with tractors and protest signs, some painted to look like Wild West wanted posters targeting Colorado officials. For months, the states traded barbs in press conferences, with Nebraska threatening lawsuits and Colorado countering that they were just using the water legally allotted to them. The tension got so thick you could cut it with a combine harvester. What makes this feud so uniquely American is how it blended serious resource scarcity with downright theatrical antics. At one point, Nebraska senators proposed sending Colorado a bill for stolen water, calculated down to the gallon, a move so cheeky even Colorado's governor had to laugh. Behind the jokes, though, was a real struggle over livelihoods. Nebraska's farmers argued their crops were withering, while Colorado pointed to their own struggling agricultural communities. The standoff finally cooled when federal mediators brokered a water-sharing agreement, but not before cementing the Cornhole War as one of the most colorful clashes in modern state rivalry history. To this day, Nebraskans still grumble about those water-hoarding mountain folks, while Coloradans retort that maybe their neighbors should have planted less thirsty crops. It's a classic case of how shared resources and a dash of regional pride can turn even something as mundane as irrigation into a headline-grabbing showdown. And if you ever drive along the South Platte today, listen close. Some say you can still hear the echo of dueling banjos, or maybe just the sound of two states refusing to share the hose. Beneath the murky waters of Raritan Bay, a seafood smackdown was brewing, one that would turn oyster dredgers into pirates and spark threats of naval warfare between New Jersey and New York. In the 1800s, these bivalves weren't just appetizers. They were liquid gold, with oyster beds so lucrative that fishermen called them the dollar harvest. But when New Yorkers started raiding Jersey's side of the bay, gloves came off faster than shells at a raw bar. Jersey's governor made the first move, signing a law in 1829 that banned New York boats from its waters. Manhattan's oystermen responded by going full maritime outlaws, sneaking in under cover of darkness, cutting Jerseymen's dredging ropes, even ramming boats to sink their competition. One moonlit night in 1834, the conflict turned explosive when New York raiders allegedly planted gunpowder charges on the bay floor, detonating them to obliterate entire oyster beds rather than let Jersey claim them. Newspapers screamed about the Pearl Harbor of the Shellfish Wars, and suddenly both states had militias eyeing their cannons. The feud reached peak absurdity when New Jersey's governor threatened to deploy the Navy, yes, the actual Navy, to protect its mollusks. New York scoffed, insisting their oystermen had historic rights to the beds dating back to Dutch colonists. For decades, the oyster gangs operated like aquatic mafias, with harbor shootouts and midnight sabotage becoming routine. At one point, Jersey fishermen took to branding their shells like cattle, etching state initials into each one as edible proof of ownership. It took until 1882 for the U.S. Supreme Court to finally draw a watery line in the sand, splitting the bay down the middle. But even then, the rivalry simmered. As late as 1960, Jersey police were still boarding New York boats to check for illegal shellfish stashes. Today, though the oyster beds are long depleted, you can still taste the legacy of this briny feud literally. Next time you slurp a Raritan Bay oyster, remember, that little mollusk carries centuries of grudges in its shell. Surveyors with bad math skills nearly sparked the first all-out war between Rhode Island and Connecticut, and all it took was a few misplaced mile markers in the 1600s to set the stage for a century of swampy squabbles. The original colonial charters described the border as running 20 miles east of the Connecticut River, but thanks to either lousy equipment or lazy measurements, both states ended up claiming a narrow strip of land known as the Narragansett Lands. By the 1720s, things got so heated that Rhode Island sent armed men to the disputed territory, only for Connecticut to respond by, what else, building a fort and threatening to arrest any Rhode Islander who crossed the line. The real comedy began when both states tried to govern the same patch of marsh. Connecticut appointed sheriffs who promptly arrested Rhode Island officials, while Rhode Island retaliated by holding trials for Connecticut trespassers in their own makeshift courthouse. Meanwhile, locals caught in the middle played both sides, dodging taxes by declaring loyalty to whichever state's collector came knocking last. The standoff reached peak absurdity in 1726, when Rhode Island's own militia stationed near the courthouse to defend it from Connecticut accidentally set the building on fire during a raucous night of drinking. Flames consumed not just the structure but critical legal documents that might have proven their claim. Connecticut's governor couldn't resist gloating, calling it divine intervention. It took until 1759 for King George II to finally step in, splitting the difference with a compromise border that left both states mildly dissatisfied. But Rhode Island got the last laugh. Their accidental arson spared them from a lengthy court battle, and today that burned courthouse site is a quiet park where tourists can picnic on the very spot where two states once almost went to war over a surveyor's bad handwriting. Imagine two states locked in a feud where the weapon of choice wasn't cannons or court orders but license plates. That's exactly what happened in the 1980s when North and South Dakota turned their highway tourism slogans into a full-blown Cold War of roadside branding. It all started when North Dakota unveiled their new plates stamped with "Great Faces, Great Places," a nod to Mount Rushmore and the state's scenic beauty. Problem was, South Dakota had already claimed Great Places for their own license plates years earlier. What followed was less a legal battle and more a sibling-style meltdown over who got to brag the loudest. South Dakota's tourism board fired the first shot, accusing their northern neighbors of slogan theft in snarky press releases. North Dakota shrugged it off, insisting their phrase was different enough until South Dakota upped the ante by printing bumper stickers that read, "North Dakota, great imitators." The jab was playful but pointed, and soon local radio stations jumped in with parody songs mocking each other's claims. Gas stations along the border became proxy battlegrounds, with attendants playfully refusing to serve cars sporting enemy plates. One South Dakota diner even offered free pie to drivers with the correct slogan, a deliciously petty power move. The rivalry peaked when both states' tourism budgets ballooned with competing ad campaigns. South Dakota doubled down on their Great Places brand with TV spots featuring sweeping shots of the Badlands, while North Dakota countered by plastering great faces on billboards as far away as Minneapolis. The real kicker, neither slogan was particularly original. Illinois had been using "Land of Lincoln" for decades, but that didn't stop the Dakotas from treating this like the branding equivalent of the OK Corral. Decades later, the war of words has cooled, but the legacy lingers. South Dakota eventually retired "Great Places" for the more assertive "Great Faces, Great Places," while North Dakota moved on to "Legendary." Yet if you drive along Interstate 90 today, you might still spot the occasional vintage plate from the 80s, a rolling relic of the time two states went to war over 8 little letters. It's proof that in America, even asphalt can become a battlefield when state pride's at stake. In the scorching deserts of the Southwest, a culinary showdown has been simmering for over a century, one that pits Texas pride against New Mexican tradition in a battle over who truly owns the soul of chili. Texans will swear on their cowboy boots that authentic chili con carne was born in their state, a no-beans allowed masterpiece of beef and spices perfected on 19th century cattle drives. But just across the border, New Mexicans fire back with equal conviction, arguing their ancestors were cooking up bowls of green chili, laced stew long before the first Texan ever tossed a chuck wagon ingredient into a pot. This isn't just foodie banter, it's a feud that sparked legislative declarations, public smackdowns, and even a few spicy vandalism incidents. The rivalry hit its boiling point in 1977, when Texas lawmakers passed a resolution officially declaring chili the state dish, with a very specific clause: real chili does not include beans. The message was clear: New Mexico's beanie green chili heavy versions were imposters. Not to be outdone, New Mexico's legislature shot back with their own proclamation, dubbing their capital of Santa Fe the chili capital of the world, and mocking Texas's version as bland meat soup. Local newspapers had a field day, with Albuquerque chefs staging bean-in protests and Austin pitmasters retaliating by shipping cases of beanless chili to Santa Fe City Hall. What makes this feud so deliciously American is how it mirrors each state's identity. Texas chili, with its purest, meat-centric approach, reflects the state's cowboy mythology, rugged, straightforward, and resistant to outside influence. New Mexico's version, bursting with locally grown hatch green chilies and often pinto beans, speaks to its indigenous and Hispanic roots, where communal cooking and layered flavors reign. Both sides dig in with religious fervor. Ask a Texan about adding beans and you'll get a look usually reserved for someone kicking a puppy. Mention Texas chili to a New Mexican, and they'll likely hand you a roasted green chili like it's a peace treaty you've been ignoring. The conflict even spilled onto the highways. In the 90s, New Mexico tourism ads near the Texas border cheekily asked, "Ever had real chili?" prompting Texans to deface the billboards with spray-painted "No Beans" slogans. Meanwhile, chili cook-offs became proxy battles, with judges from each state docking points for foreign ingredients from the rival camp. The tension still simmers today, though there's one place you'll find détente: the annual Toledo International Chili Championship, where cooks from both states compete under a truce of mutual respect, and where bean debates are wisely left outside the tasting tent. After all, some rivalries are best settled with a spoon, not a subpoena. Georgia and Tennessee have been locked in a quiet Cold War for over 2 centuries, all thanks to a surveyor who couldn't find true north if his life depended on it. Back in 1818, a team led by astronomer James Camac was supposed to draw the border along the 35th parallel, but faulty equipment and thick forest led them a mile too far south. At the time, nobody batted an eye, but fast forward to 2008, when Georgia, parched from a historic drought, suddenly realized that tiny miscalculation placed the Tennessee River just out of reach. What followed wasn't just a legal squabble, it was a full-blown, guns-drawn but thankfully not fired standoff between two states thirsty for water and pride. Georgia lawmakers didn't just send sternly worded letters, they passed a resolution declaring the original survey null and void, effectively redrawing the border to give themselves access to the river's water. Tennessee's governor scoffed, calling it a stunt, while local sheriffs near the disputed zone joked about forming a toothpick militia to defend their fishing spots. The tension peaked when Georgia's House Speaker threatened to send surveyors north with state troopers as escorts, prompting Tennessee to warn they'd be met with hospitality best described as unwelcoming. Newspapers dubbed it the Hydro War, and for a brief, bizarre moment, America faced the prospect of National Guardsmen facing off over a creek. What makes this feud uniquely absurd is how history keeps resurrecting it. Georgia first tried to correct the border in the 1880s, then again in the 1940s during another drought. Each time, Tennessee's response boiled down to a polite but firm "not a chance." Yet the two states still can't resist poking the bear, or in this case, the river. In 2021, Georgia lawmakers revived the dispute with a new bill, arguing modern GPS proved the original survey wrong. Tennessee's counter, a sarcastic resolution offering to sell them water at a fair market price. The real kicker, that sliver of land Georgia wants isn't even particularly scenic. No Grand Canyons, no oil reserves, just a sleepy stretch of riverbank where locals from both states have been fishing side by side for generations, ignoring the imaginary line politicians keep fighting over. It's a rivalry built less on necessity than on stubbornness, where the only thing thicker than the legal briefs is the irony. Two states locked in a battle over water rights, all because a guy with a compass 200 years ago picked the wrong tree to lean against. The hatred between Kansas and Missouri runs deeper than barbecue sauce stains on a tailgate jersey. It's a feud forged in gunpowder and reignited at every Chiefs game. Long before Arrowhead Stadium became a battleground for football bragging rights, the border between these states was soaked in blood during the bleeding Kansas era of the 1850s. Pro-slavery Missouri border ruffians clashed with abolitionist Kansans in raids so vicious they became a grim preview of the Civil War. But here's what history books often miss: the violence never really ended. It just swapped muskets for foam fingers. Modern-day Missourians still bristle at the label Jayhawker, a term once hurled at anti-slavery guerrillas. Meanwhile, Kansans cling to their free state roots with the same pride they bring to their Godfrey's BBQ sauce. The rivalry exploded back into headlines in 2019 when the two states faced off in the Show Me State vs. Sunflower State BBQ battle, a culinary showdown where judges actually docked points from Missouri ribs for being too saucy, prompting St. Louis pitmasters to accuse Kansans of having dry rub envy. Social media erupted faster than a grease fire, with #border wars trending as fans from both states photoshopped each other's license plates onto covered wagons. Sports took the animosity to nuclear levels. When the Chiefs relocated from Dallas to Kansas City, Missouri in 1963, Kansas fans claimed partial ownership, despite the stadium sitting squarely across state lines. The result, a fan base so territorially divided, bars in Kansas City, Kansas refused to serve Missouri-themed cocktails, while Missouri bars retaliate by banning Kansas-brewed beer on game days. The hostility peaks during the Showdown series, an annual baseball clash between the Royals and the now relocated Kansas City Athletics, where fans once pelted the field with packets of opposing states' barbecue sauce. Even geography isn't safe from the bickering. Missouri's "Show Me" motto gets mocked by Kansans as proof of their neighbors' stubbornness, while Kansans get ribbed for their flyover state reputation. But the most telling sign of this rivalry's endurance, in 2021, a Missouri senator jokingly proposed building a border wall not to stop immigration, but to keep out Kansas' inferior burnt ends. Somewhere, a 19th-century raider is nodding approvingly. Surveyors armed with compasses and colonial egos set the stage for one of America's most absurd border blunders, the Delaware-Pennsylvania wedge dispute. Back in 1784, a team tasked with marking the boundary between William Penn's lands and Lord Baltimore's holdings made a critical mistake. Instead of following the circular arc described in the original charter, they drew a straight line, leaving an 800-acre triangle of land unclaimed. What followed wasn't just bureaucratic confusion. It was a century-long free-for-all where this so-called wedge became a lawless playground for smugglers, tax cheats, and opportunists from both colonies. At first, neither side cared much about a patch of scrubby forest, but by the 1800s that changed when locals realized the wedge's prime location, just far enough from Philadelphia and Dover that neither state's sheriffs bothered patrolling it. Soon, the area teemed with illegal stills, fugitives ducking extradition, and farmers who cheerfully ignored tax collectors from both states. Pennsylvania would send agents to levy property taxes, only for Delaware officials to show up weeks later demanding payment for the same plots. One particularly brawny farmer supposedly chased off both sets of taxmen with a pitchfork, declaring the wedge God's own tax haven. The feud turned theatrical in 1892 when Delaware erected a wooden marker declaring the wedge theirs, only for Pennsylvania to uproot it under cover of night and plant their own. For years, the two states played this passive-aggressive game of territorial tag, alternating between silent glares and public grandstanding. Newspapers had a field day, dubbing it the War of the Wooden Posts, while residents of the wedge leaned into their outlaw reputation, hosting raucous barn dances advertised as free from all state interference. Resolution finally came in 1921, but not without one last act of pettiness. After the Supreme Court awarded the wedge to Delaware, Pennsylvania officials waited exactly 1 year before formally acknowledging the decision, just long enough to prove they weren't happy about it. Today, that disputed sliver of land holds an unexpected legacy, a cluster of boutique vineyards whose owners joke they're carrying on the tradition of defiance by fermenting grapes that technically could have been taxed by two states a century ago. Some rivalries fade with time. This one just learned to hold its liquor. The fight over Lake Lanier wasn't just about water. It was a three-state cage match where Alabama, Georgia, and Florida all grabbed their legal briefs and dove in headfirst. At the center of the clash was the Army Corps of Engineers' decision to prioritize Atlanta's drinking water needs in the 1990s, a move Alabama called liquid larceny, and Florida claimed was starving their oyster beds downstream. What followed was less a courtroom drama and more a hydro-political soap opera, complete with governors trading insults, lawyers arguing over raindrops, and one Georgia farmer who famously told reporters, "I didn't know water had so many daddies." Alabama came out swinging first, accusing Georgia of turning Lake Lanier into their personal bathtub while leaving their neighbors with a trickle. Their argument. The Corps had rewritten the rulebook without permission, favoring Atlanta's sprawl over Alabama's factories and Florida's fisheries. At one point, an Alabama lawmaker even proposed building a pipeline to reclaim their stolen share, while Georgia's governor shot back that his state's water was not a charity buffet. The rhetoric got so heated, federal judges had to remind everyone that, legally speaking, rain doesn't come with a receipt. Florida, meanwhile, played the environmental card, arguing that Georgia's water greed was killing Apalachicola Bay's oyster industry. They brought in scientists, fishermen, and even a chef who claimed Georgia's upstream selfishness was ruining his gumbo. The courtroom became a circus of competing metaphors. Lawyers compared rivers to veins, lifelines, and at one point, a zero-sum game of liquid monopoly. The judge finally threw up his hands and ordered mediation, which dragged on so long drought conditions came and went before anything was settled. The real twist came when Georgia accidentally proved Alabama's point. During a brutal drought in 2007, Atlanta's reservoirs sank so low that officials begged the Corps to release more water from Lanier, only for Alabama to pounce with satellite images showing Georgia's lush golf courses still guzzling sprinkler water. The hypocrisy was too juicy to ignore. Headlines screamed about grass vs. Gulf, and suddenly the fight wasn't just about law, it was about perception. Georgia's attempts to spin the narrative collapsed faster than a sandcastle in high tide. After decades of lawsuits, the Supreme Court finally ruled in 2021 that Georgia could keep most of its water, but with strict conservation strings attached. Alabama got a few extra gallons for power plants, and Florida got, well, mostly sympathy. The legacy, a masterclass in how not to share a bathtub. To this day, Georgia farmers still joke that they check the weather forecast and the Alabama lawsuit forecast, while Apalachicola oystermen blame every bad harvest on those thirsty Yankees upriver. It's a rivalry where the only real winners were the lawyers and maybe the fish, who never had to sit through a mediation session. Utah's teetotaling temperance laws turned a sleepy stretch of desert into the front lines of a boozy border skirmish, one where the only shots fired came from whiskey bottles hitting bar rails. When Utah capped alcohol content at 4% in the 1950s, thirsty drinkers didn't just grumble, they mobilized. Within months, bars began sprouting along the Idaho border like mushrooms after rain, catering to Utahns willing to drive for a proper drink. The most infamous of these, the State Line Tavern, sat so close to the boundary that patrons could literally stumble from one state's vice laws into another's liberties. Idaho entrepreneurs smelled opportunity. Suddenly, towns like Malad City transformed into neon-lit oases, their parking lots crammed with Utah plates every weekend. Bartenders kept border specials, a stronger pause for folks who'd crossed state lines, while Utah's liquor control agents lurked outside, noting license plates and reporting violators to their employers back home. The cat-and-mouse game turned theatrical when Utah officials launched Operation Bottleneck in 1953, sending undercover agents to Idaho bars to entrap residents smuggling full-strength beer across state lines. One memorable bust involved an agent hiding in a trunk while his friend drove back to Utah with a case of contraband, cause only for the sting to collapse when the driver got pulled over for speeding, and the cop found both the beer and a suspiciously sweaty state employee curled in the back. The modern era softened the feud but never snuffed it out. Today, Utah's liquor laws remain some of the strictest in the nation, while Idaho's border towns lean into their outlaw reputations with state-line pub crawls that draw thousands. Bars like the Portneuf Grill in Pocatello still serve Utah-compliant versions of cocktails watered down for to-go cups alongside their full-strength offerings, a wink to the ongoing cultural tug-of-war. Even the geography taunts. One popular hiking trail straddles the border where hikers can legally crack a beer mid-step, but only if they stand on the Idaho side. What began as a prohibition-style showdown has mellowed into a rowdy cultural inside joke. Utah's legislators periodically float ideas to loosen restrictions, prompting Idaho bar owners to half-jokingly threaten economic retaliation. Meanwhile, Utahns continue their migration north every weekend, turning Idaho's highways into a river of brake lights, proof that some rivalries aren't fought with cannons or court orders, but with pint glasses and the eternal human desire to outsmart the rulebook. The Chesapeake Bay might look peaceful from above, but beneath its shimmering surface rages a culinary civil war centered on one question: what really belongs in a crab cake? Marylanders swear by their minimalist approach, lumps of blue crab held together with little more than egg, mustard, and a whisper of Old Bay seasoning. Cross the state line into Virginia, though, and you'll find patties packed with breadcrumbs, diced vegetables, and enough filler to make a Baltimore chef reach for their claw hammer. This isn't just a difference in taste, it's a full-blown identity crisis served on a buttered bun. Maryland's purists treat their recipe like a sacred text. At iconic spots like Feuds in Baltimore, the cakes are nearly 90% crab, so delicate they threaten to crumble at the slightest fork tap. Anything else is a bread ball with seafood sprinkles, snarked one Annapolis restaurateur during a televised debate that had Virginians clutching their pearls. Virginia's defense, their version isn't just thriftier, it's designed to highlight the crab, not drown it. Marylanders are so busy bragging about purity, they forget texture exists. Fired back a Norfolk chef whose own recipe includes bell peppers and a dash of Worcestershire sauce for what he calls flavor layers. The feud spilled beyond kitchens when Virginia's tourism board launched ads along Interstate 95 boasting more crab, less snobbery, a direct shot at Maryland's gourmet pricing. Maryland retaliated by projecting real crabs don't need filler onto the side of a Richmond office building, prompting Virginia's governor to mail a basket of Virginia-style cakes to Annapolis with a note, complimentary training wheels. Social media erupted into #crabgate, with home cooks from both states posting side-by-side comparisons tagged #crab or crouton. Even science got dragged into the debate. A University of Maryland food lab once ran DNA tests on both styles to prove their version had higher crab content, while a Virginia Tech study countered that breadcrumbs actually enhanced flavor absorption. The real losers, tourists who naively order a crab cake in one state and accidentally insult the other. I mentioned I liked Virginia's version at a Baltimore bar, confessed one traveler, and the bartender accidentally charged me for extra tartar sauce with a side of stink eye. Underneath the theatrics lies a deeper divide. Maryland's obsession with crab purity mirrors its self-image as the Chesapeake's rightful heir, where watermen have hauled in blue crabs for generations. Virginia, with its blend of southern and coastal influences, sees no shame in borrowing from other traditions, even if it means ruffling a few Old Bay-sprinkled feathers. The rivalry peaks every summer when both states declare competing crab cake days, each claiming theirs is the official version. Judges at Maryland's events dock points for visible filler, while Virginia's contests reward structural integrity. Yet there's one place the feud pauses, the annual Bay Bridge Boat Show, where watermen from both states let their catch do the talking. We argue all day, admits a Smith Island crabber, but when a nor'easter blows in, we're all just trying to keep the crabs and the paychecks coming in. Maybe that's the secret ingredient here, enough mutual respect to keep the rivalry simmering, but never boiling over. After all, nothing unites these states like side-eyeing New England when they dare to put mayo in a crab roll. Football fans know the Red River rivalry as the annual slugfest where Oklahoma and Texas battle under the Cotton Bowl's autumn spotlight. But long before the Sooners and Longhorns clashed over pigskin, they were locked in a far messier fight, one where the playing field literally moved beneath their feet. The Red River itself became the ultimate unreliable referee, shifting its course during floods and leaving farmers on both sides suddenly unsure whether they owed taxes to Austin or Oklahoma City. The chaos began in the early 1900s when settlers realized the river's habit of meandering had inadvertently redrawn state lines overnight. A Texas cotton farmer might wake up to find his barn now sat on Oklahoma soil, while his neighbor's wheat field had been annexed by the Lone Star State without so much as a howdy. Surveyors tried to impose order, but the river laughed at their straight lines during one epic flood in 1930. The Red jumped its banks by over a mile, stranding an entire Oklahoma community on the wrong side of the border. Tempers flared when Texas tax collectors tried to strong-arm these accidental new residents, prompting Oklahoma's governor to threaten sending in the National Guard to defend our dirt. Newspapers dubbed it the War of the Wandering River, but for families caught in the middle, it was anything but amusing. One farmer testified in court that he'd paid taxes to both states for 5 years just to avoid losing his land, while another received jury summons from 2 counties simultaneously, neither willing to concede jurisdiction. The absurdity peaked when a Texas sheriff arrested an Oklahoma man for rustling cattle that, thanks to the river's latest curve, were technically grazing in Texas. The case collapsed after witnesses couldn't agree which state's law applied, leading the judge to throw up his hands and declare, "This river has more opinions than a Baptist potluck." Congress finally intervened in 1927, freezing the border at the river's 1920 course, but the red wasn't done stirring trouble. In the Dust Bowl era, desperate farmers on both sides sabotaged each other's irrigation ditches, leading to midnight brawls along the banks. Texas Rangers and Oklahoma Marshals occasionally faced off like Old West gunfighters, though their weapons were survey maps and injunctions instead of six-shooters. Today, the river's capricious spirit lives on in the rivalry's lore. During Red River Shootout Week, clever tailgaters still bring vintage "Welcome to Texas/Oklahoma, maybe" signs, while historians chuckle at the irony. Two states that spent decades fighting over where to draw the line now share a football game where the only boundary that matters is the 50-yard line. Somewhere under that stadium's roar, you can still hear the echo of a farmer shouting at a confused tax assessor, "Look, you'll figure it out, my corn don't care what state it's in." The concrete colossus we now call Hoover Dam almost became ground zero for America's most surreal water war, one where Arizona deployed armed troops to stop Nevada from stealing the Colorado River. In 1931, as construction crews began pouring the dam's foundation, Arizona's governor declared martial law along the riverbanks, convinced Nevada's diversion tunnels would leave his state's cotton fields as parched as Death Valley. What followed wasn't just legal wrangling, it was a full-blown, guns-drawn standoff where survey markers became battle lines and bulldozers rolled under the watchful eyes of militia rifles. Arizona's panic wasn't entirely unfounded. The state had long nursed a suspicion that upstream neighbors, especially Nevada and California, were plotting to siphon off their share of the Colorado. When the Bureau of Reclamation approved dam plans that favored Nevada's water allocations, Arizona's Governor George Hunt made his move. He ordered the Arizona National Guard to seize the ferry landing at Willow Beach, blocking Nevada's construction trucks from crossing. Armed guardsmen patrolled the river with orders to repel any unauthorized incursions, while engineers on the Nevada side scrambled to reroute cement deliveries via circuitous desert roads. The spectacle made national headlines, with one reporter dubbing it the thirstiest siege in American history. Nevada played it cool, at least publicly. Governor Fred Baltzar dismissed Arizona's theatrics as irrigation-fueled hysterics, but privately, his staff scrambled to secure federal intervention. The showdown reached its peak when Arizona militiamen intercepted a barge carrying dynamite, insisting it was hydrological contraband. For weeks, the two states glowered at each other across the river like Old West gunslingers, their fingers hovering near legal triggers rather than six-shooters. The stalemate only broke when the Supreme Court stepped in, temporarily freezing construction until water rights could be settled. The court's eventual ruling in 1934 should have been a blow to Arizona. They lost most claims to the dam's upstream water. But here's the twist. The conflict forced Congress to finally codify Colorado River allocations, giving Arizona guaranteed shares that later enabled their own megaprojects like the Central Arizona Project. Nevada got its dam, but Arizona got something more valuable: legal certainty. Today, the dam's visitor center glosses over the armed standoff, but park rangers still share the story with a wink. That's the thing about water in the West. Sometimes you have to aim a rifle at your neighbor just to get them to pass the hose. Bite into a cheese-stuffed burger in Minneapolis and they'll swear you're holding a Jussie Lucy. Cross the border into Wisconsin and suddenly, it's a Juicy Lucy, same molten core of gooey American cheese, but with an extra I that might as well be a middle finger to Minnesota. This isn't just a spelling debate, It's a full-blown culinary turf war where two Midwest states have spent decades brawling over bragging rights to the ultimate bar food masterpiece. The feud traces back to the smoky kitchens of 1950s dive bars, where both states insist some genius first pressed two patties around a cheese slice, creating that iconic lava-like bite. Minneapolis points to the old Matt's Bar, where a regular supposedly demanded his burger, so juicy it'd make Lucy blush, hence the name. But Wisconsin's taverns counter with their own law, claiming Milwaukee grease joints were serving cheese-packed patties before Matt's even had a deep fryer. The real kicker, both spellings got trademarked, turning every Jussy vs. Juicy menu into a not-so-subtle declaration of allegiance. Things turned legally messy when a Wisconsin restaurant chain tried to trademark Juicy Lucy in 2008, prompting Minnesota bars to collectively lose their minds. Matt's owner famously told reporters, "You can't put lipstick on our Lucy and call her yours," while Wisconsinites shot back that Minnesota's spelling looked like a typo from a drunk sous chef. The battle raged all the way to the U.S. Patent Office, where bureaucrats probably regretted not specializing in pizza patents instead. What makes this rivalry so deliciously absurd is how it mirrors each state's identity. Wisconsin, America's Dairyland, treats cheese like a birthright, so of course they'd claim the cheesiest burger. Minnesota, land of stubborn pragmatism, clings to its no-frills, misspelled original like a Viking guarding loot. The feud even spills onto the gridiron. During Packers-Vikings games, Wisconsin tailgaters grill properly spelled Lucy's just to troll their neighbors, while Minnesota fans retaliate by serving them with the cheese deliberately under-melted. Modern-day food historians have tried to play peacemaker, noting that cheese-stuffed burgers likely existed in multiple places simultaneously. But try telling that to the regulars at Matt's, where the walls are plastered with articles defending their legacy, or to Milwaukee's Sobelman's Pub, which once offered a border war special with two burgers, one spelled each way just to stoke the flames. In the end, the only undisputed truth is that whoever invented it, the real winner is anyone who's ever taken that first catastrophic cheese-scalded bite. Just don't ask which state's version is better unless you're wearing flame-retardant flannel. Drive north on Interstate 93 any Saturday morning, and you'll witness a modern gold rush, only instead of pickaxes and pans, the tools of choice are shopping bags and reusable totes. Welcome to the great Massachusetts-New Hampshire tax evasion shopping rivalry, where the only thing thicker than the traffic is the irony. New Hampshire's lack of a sales tax has turned its border towns into retail meccas for bargain hunting mass shoals, as locals affectionately or not so affectionately call them. But this isn't just about skipping a 6.25% surcharge, it's a full-blown economic Cold War with billboards as its battlefield and parking lots as its trenches. Massachusetts merchants first sounded the alarm in the 1990s, when New Hampshire's Rockingham Park Mall near Salem became so overrun with Bay Staters, license plates outnumbered local pine trees. The response, passive-aggressive highway signs funded by Massachusetts retail associations warning of weekend gridlock ahead and mountain traffic delays, neither of which were technically lies, but definitely omitted the real reason for the backup, a 3-mile queue for the Apple store at the Pheasant Lane Mall. New Hampshire, ever the gracious host, leaned into the chaos with cheeky radio ads touting tax-free therapy and retail revenge. One particularly savage billboard near the border simply read, "Your governor works for us now," with a tally of Massachusetts dollars spent that year. The skirmish turned legislative when Massachusetts tried to strong-arm residents into declaring online purchases from New Hampshire retailers, a move dubbed the Amazon loophole purge. New Hampshire's governor fired back by offering Massachusetts shoppers asylum at their welcome centers, complete with discount coupons and Dunkin' coffee that, yes, cost less without the tax. The real power move came when New Hampshire launched Tax Freedom Day, events right at the border, where Massachusetts officials once staged a counter-protest only to have their own staffers sneak off to buy tax-free sneakers mid-rally. What makes this rivalry so delicious is how it flips stereotypes. Normally, it's the big city draining resources from rural neighbors. Here, it's New Hampshire, population 1.4 million, playing David to Massachusetts Goliath, using nothing but a tax code and sheer audacity. Even the traffic jams tell a story. Rows of Massachusetts Priuses idling next to New Hampshire pickup trucks, all united in their quest to stick it to Beacon Hill. And while Massachusetts may have Harvard and Fenway, New Hampshire has the ultimate flex, watching their neighbors pay for the privilege of funding their roads. Talk about a Black Friday deal that lasts all year. The Florida-Georgia football rivalry might light up Jacksonville every fall, but the real beef between these states isn't just on the gridiron, it's in the swamps. For decades, Georgia wildlife officials have accused their southern neighbors of unleashing a slithery menace across state lines: nuisance alligators. That's right, what started as a battle between bulldogs and gators on the field has spilled into the marshes, where Georgia claims Florida's problem: reptiles are migrating north like scaly, toothy refugees. This isn't just barstool conspiracy talk. Georgia's Department of Natural Resources has documented a spike in alligator sightings in the Okefenokee region, and they're pointing fingers at Florida's controversial gator relocation program. When Floridians call in complaints about a 6-footer in their pool, trappers often haul the reptiles to remote areas, some suspiciously close to the state line. It's like Florida's dumping their troublemakers on our doorstep, grumbled one Georgia biologist, noting that relocated gators can trek over 50 miles to find new turf. The feud reached peak absurdity when a particularly bold gator nicknamed Swamp Sovereign took up residence in a Georgia golf course's water hazard, complete with a Florida tag still clipped to its tail. Florida's response, a mix of shrugs and sly defiance. "Gators don't respect borders," quipped one trapper who admitted some translocated reptiles might wander north. Meanwhile, Georgia's solution has been equal parts pragmatic and petty, ramping up their own gator hunting permits while quietly returning tagged Florida gators by dumping them back over the border under cover of night. Local sheriffs have reported finding confused reptiles with spray-painted messages like "Return to Sender" on their hides. The rivalry even infiltrated state politics. In 2018, a Georgia lawmaker proposed a bill requiring Florida to reimburse them for alligator-related property damage, calling it an invasive species surcharge. Florida's Wildlife Commission fired back with a social media post showcasing Georgia's own homegrown gator population, captioned, "You're just jealous our mascots are real." The jab was playful, but the tension is real, especially for farmers along the St. Mary's River, where gators have allegedly developed a taste for free-range chickens. What makes this clash so uniquely Southern is how it mirrors the football rivalry spirit. Just like the annual world's largest outdoor cocktail party game, the Gator Grudge mixes fierce competition with a wink. Georgia fans hiss at Florida's reptile reputation, while gator boosters revel in their state's untamed mystique. And when a Georgia hunter bagged a 12-foot behemoth near the border in 2021, the headline wrote itself, "Dogs finally beat a gator." Some rivalries are fought with touchdowns, others are settled by toothy ambushes in the reeds. Either way, both states can agree on one thing: it's always open season on bragging rights. The vast plains between Wyoming and Montana might look peaceful now, but beneath the sagebrush lies a legal fault line that's been cracking open for over a century, one that traces back to a single disastrous treaty oversight. When the Crow Nation signed the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, they believed they'd secured a permanent homeland stretching from the Bighorn Mountains to the Yellowstone River. But just 15 years later, the U.S. government redrew the map without their consent, slicing the reservation in half along what would become the Wyoming-Montana border. Overnight, Crow families found themselves straddling two territories, their ancestral hunting grounds suddenly subject to dueling state laws and competing tax collectors. The confusion wasn't just bureaucratic, it turned lethal. In 1887, Montana authorities arrested a crow hunter for killing elk out of season, even though his people had treaty rights to hunt there so long as the grass grows. Wyoming, meanwhile, taxed crow-owned cattle driven across the border to market, ignoring the tribe's sovereignty. Tribal leaders protested to Washington, but federal agents shrugged, calling it a state matter. The Crow Nation became a political football, with Montana and Wyoming arguing over who got to exploit their resources while refusing to recognize their jurisdiction. Even the railroads got in on the chaos when the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy line laid tracks through the reservation in the 1890s. Wyoming claimed the right-of-way fees while Montana pocketed the land taxes. Fast forward to the 21st century, and the tug-of-war hasn't eased, it's just swapped muskets for lawsuits. In 2005, Wyoming tried to levy state income tax on Crow members working in Montana's coal mines, sparking a Supreme Court battle that hinged on whether the 1868 treaty voided state borders. Montana retaliated by challenging the tribe's right to manage water rights along the Bighorn River, which originates in Wyoming but flows through their land. Legal scholars dubbed it the War of the Paper Borders, with attorneys passing century-old maps like battlefield plans. The cruelest irony, both states profit from the Crows' resources while fighting their sovereignty. Wyoming collects millions in mineral royalties from reservation lands, while Montana pockets revenue from Crow tourism at Little Bighorn Battlefield. Yet when the tribe proposed a shared casino resort straddling the border in 2015, legislators from both states blocked it, fearing jurisdictional chaos. The Crow chairman at the time, Darren Old Coyote, summed it up bitterly: "They're fine with taking our coal and our history, just not our sovereignty." Today, the border remains a scar. Drive through the reservation, and you'll see the divide in stark relief. Wyoming-side gas stations flaunt tax-free tobacco to lure Montana customers, while Montana patrols aggressively ticket Crow members with Wyoming plates. Tribal police complain they need a flowchart to know which state's laws apply where. But there's hope in the next generation. Crow lawyers now studying 19th century treaties like sacred texts, determined to rewrite an ending where the grass still grows and the people finally decide which lines matter. Crossing the Illinois-Indiana border shouldn't require a time machine, but for decades it practically did. Welcome to the most disorienting rivalry in American history, where towns along the state line couldn't agree on what time it was. This wasn't just a quirk of geography, it was full-blown chaos, with gas stations displaying two different clocks, factories scrambling to adjust schedules, and bus drivers handing out cheat sheets so commuters wouldn't miss their rides. The root of the madness, a century of stubbornness, profit, and one-upmanship that turned the Midwest into a real-life episode of the Twilight Zone. It all started in the early 20th century when railroads standardized time zones across the country. Indiana, ever the contrarian, initially refused to play along, leaving each county to decide whether they'd sync with Chicago's Central Time or New York's Eastern Time. The result, a patchwork of confusion where driving 20 miles east could literally cost you an hour. Towns like Kentland, Indiana, became temporal no-man's lands, one side of Main Street on Central, the other on Eastern. Schools held parent-teacher conferences with footnotes about which clock to follow, and factories near the border faced revolt when workers realized their shifts ended an hour earlier just by crossing the parking lot. Businesses weaponized the chaos. Movie theaters in Indiana towns near the Illinois border advertised showtimes in both zones to lure audiences, while Illinois diners near the state line ran happy hours that lasted 2 actual hours by hopping time zones. The rivalry peaked in the 1980s when an Indiana county abruptly switched to Central Time to align with Chicago's business district, only for neighboring Illinois towns to retaliate by shifting their clocks to Eastern, just to spite them. The Chicago Tribune dubbed it the chronology Cold War, and for good reason. One interstate truck stop famously installed 3 clocks, Central, Eastern, and a sarcastic third labeled God's Time. Federal intervention finally came in 2006, but not without drama. Indiana's Governor Mitch Daniels pushed for statewide daylight saving time previously. Some counties observed it, others didn't, calling the old system a Hoosier embarrassment. But even then, outliers like Gary clung to Central Time to stay synced with Chicago. Today, most of Indiana grudgingly ticks on Eastern Time, but remnants of the feud linger. Drive through tiny towns like Veedersburg, and you'll still find old-timers who set their watches to fast time or slow time, depending on which side of the county line they're headed. It's a rivalry where the only real losers were punctuality and sanity, and maybe that one truck stop employee who had to reset all those clocks twice a year. Down in the sticky, sweet heart of the South, 2 states have been locked in a marshmallow-coated showdown for over a century, all thanks to a snack so simple, it's genius: the moon pie. Tennessee proudly points to the Chattanooga Bakery's official story, where a traveling salesman in 1917 supposedly asked for a snack as big as the moon for coal miners, resulting in that iconic graham cracker marshmallow chocolate combo. But just across the Mississippi, Arkansas fires back with receipts of their own local bakeries insist they were stacking similar treats in lunch pails decades earlier, long before Chattanooga slapped a catchy name on theirs. This isn't just dessert trivia, it's a sugar-rushed rivalry where recipes become battle plans and county fairs turn into culinary war zones. Tennessee's strongest evidence comes straight from the moon pie's packaging, which touts that 1917 origin story like scripture. Chattanooga even hosts an annual Moon Pie Festival, complete with a 100-pound moon pie drop on New Year's Eve, a not-so-subtle flex of snack supremacy. But Arkansas isn't bowing to corporate branding. Historians in Little Rock dug up newspaper clippings from the 1890s advertising marshmallow sandwiches at general stores near the Ozarks, while oral histories from Delta farmers describe sharecroppers unwrapping wax paper bundles of nearly identical treats. "We didn't call them moon pies back then," one Arkansas baker told a food magazine, "but break one open next to Chattanooga's version and tell me which came first." The feud turned deliciously petty when both states launched dueling moon pie-themed tourism campaigns. Tennessee's highway welcome centers handed out free samples with tags reading, "Born here, raised right," while Arkansas retaliated with murals in mountain towns proclaiming the real moon pie trail. The rivalry hit peak absurdity during a 2015 food historians symposium, when an Arkansan scholar presented a crumbling ledger from a defunct bakery, listing moon pies lowercase, no trademark, in 1908. Tennessee's delegation dismissed it as a coincidence of phrasing, prompting the Arkansan to retort, "Funny how coincidences always taste like marshmallow." Festivals became the ultimate proving grounds. At Bell Buckle, Tennessee's RC and Moon Pie Festival, a nod to the classic Southern soda pairing, vendors hawked deep-fried moon pies and T-shirts boasting, "Original since 1917." Meanwhile, over in Batesville, Arkansas, the Ozark Moon Pie Jamboree leans into folksier lore with bluegrass bands and pie-eating contests where contestants devour stacks of, you guessed it, locally made Arkansas-style moon pies, which suspiciously resemble Tennessee's but with a thicker smear of chocolate. "Ours don't crumble like those Chattanooga knockoffs," bragged one Arkansas pitmaster whose barbecue stand sells moon pie banana pudding hybrids. What makes this clash so uniquely Southern is how it mirrors both states' identities. Tennessee's version is polished, corporate-backed, and tied to industry, much like Nashville's music biz or Memphis's FedEx empire. Arkansas's claim is scrappier, rooted in farm kitchens and oral tradition, echoing its underdog reputation. Yet in a twist worthy of a Faulkner novel, both sides secretly need each other. Tennessee's mass-produced moon pies gave the snack its fame, but Arkansas's grassroots defiance keeps the legend alive. And when a moon pie crumbles, whether in a lunchbox or a courtroom, no one really loses, except maybe diabetics. Step across the Hudson River, and you're not just changing states, you're entering a culinary war zone where the battleground is flour-dusted and the weapon of choice is a foldable slice. The New York-New Jersey pizza feud isn't just about taste. It's a holy war over crust theology, with Staten Island's thin-crust purists on one side and Jersey's unapologetic topping innovators on the other. And trust us, nobody's holding back. New York's pizza orthodoxy is clear. If you can't fold it, it's not pizza. The city's thin, wide slices are engineered for portability, a perfect balance of crispness and chew, with just enough structural integrity to survive a subway ride. But venture into Jersey and suddenly the rules dissolve. Here, pizzerias pile on toppings with abandon, from Taylor ham to clams, creating pies so hefty they demand a fork. To a Staten Island pizzaiolo, this is borderline blasphemy. You wouldn't put ketchup on a steak, snarked one Brooklyn-born chef, gesturing to Jersey's signature, tomato pie, a thick crust variant where sauce reigns supreme. The feud turned cinematic in 2019 when a Staten Island pizzeria launched a billboard near the Goethals Bridge declaring, "Real pizza doesn't need a fork." Jersey's response, a viral video from a Hoboken joint showing a crowd cheering as a chef balanced 9 toppings on a single slice without structural failure. Social media erupted, with #pizza civil war trending as food critics and frat boys alike weighed in. Even governors got involved. New York's Cuomo once joked that Jersey pizza was a casserole with identity issues, while New Jersey's Murphy fired back, "At least ours doesn't disintegrate like a napkin." Dig deeper, and this isn't just about dough thickness. New York's pizza reflects its immigrant roots, Neapolitan simplicity scaled for the masses where the crust is the canvas. Jersey's approach mirrors its blue-collar diversity, embracing everything from Italian-American grandma pies to Polish kielbasa hybrids. The rivalry peaks at festivals like the Battles of the Bordering Ovens, where judges dock points for excessive flop or fork dependency, depending on which side of the Hudson they hail from. Yet for all the trash talk, there's grudging respect. Jersey secretly ships its fresh mozzarella to New York joints, while Manhattanites sneak across for late-night disco fries pizza after last call. Maybe that's the real secret sauce here, a rivalry so delicious even the purists can't resist a bite of the enemy's pie. Just don't ask them to admit it. Drive through the rolling bluegrass hills of Kentucky, and you'll hear locals brag that their bourbon is so smooth, it should be classified as a religious experience. Cross into Tennessee, though, and they'll tell you their whiskey is so pure, it practically preaches its own sermon. This isn't just a difference in distillation, it's a full-blown holy war between two southern titans, where copper stills are the pulpits and tasting rooms double as revival tents. Kentucky's case rests on geography and gospel. By law, bourbon must be made with at least 51% corn and aged in new charred oak barrels, but Kentuckians swear their limestone-filtered water and humidity-swollen seasons give their spirit an unrivaled depth. Walk into any Louisville distillery and they'll hit you with a sales pitch like a revival preacher. Single barrel this, small batch that, all while subtly implying Tennessee's version is just bourbon with an identity crisis. The rivalry turns downright theatrical during the Kentucky Bourbon Festival, where master distillers perform sacred rituals like barrel thumping to prove their aging process is superior. One Bardstown tour guide put it bluntly, "We don't filter our character through charcoal, we let time do the talking." Tennessee, of course, fires back with the zeal of a choir defending its hymnbook. Their secret weapon, the Lincoln County process, where whiskey drips slowly through sugar maple charcoal before aging, a step so revered distillers liken it to baptizing the spirit. Nashville's whiskey evangelists will tell you this extra filtration removes impurities while preserving flavor, creating a sip so clean it'll make you question every Kentucky bottle on your shelf. The digs get creative. At Jack Daniel's headquarters in Lynchburg, tour guides love pointing out their famous hard water spring, then quipping, "Some states need limestone to soften their edges." The tourism arms race takes this feud next level. Kentucky's Bourbon Trail flaunts historic distilleries with bourbon-soaked legacy, offering bottomless flights and barrel-strength tastings that turn visitors into converts. Tennessee's Whiskey Trail counters with gritty authenticity distilleries like George Dickel embrace their rural roots, staging live bluegrass performances amid the rickhouses. Both states even weaponize their branding. Kentucky's billboards near the border declare, "You're entering bourbon country, check your filters at the door," while Tennessee's highway signs retort, "Welcome to the home of real smoothness." Even the terminology sparks theological debates. Kentucky traditionalists scoff when Tennessee brands like Jack Daniel's get called bourbon, despite technically meeting the criteria. It's like calling a Baptist a Methodist just because they both believe in Jesus, huffed one Owensboro distiller. Tennesseans, meanwhile, argue their extra step elevates them beyond mere bourbon, a claim that riles Kentuckians almost as much as seeing their precious spirit served over ice with a Coke mixer. Yet for all the pulpit pounding, there's a shared reverence underneath. Both states nod respectfully when a rare bottle changes hands for four figures at auction, and they unite in outrage when an outsider dares suggest Scotch might be superior. After all, the real winner here is anyone who gets to sip the spoils of this centuries-old rivalry, preferably neat, with a side of Southern pride. Just don't ask which state does it better unless you're ready for a sermon. In the quiet forests of New England, where sugar maples stand like silent sentinels, a sticky rivalry simmers between Vermont and New Hampshire, one that's less about borders and more about barrels. Vermont, home to the self-proclaimed maple syrup cartel, guards its amber gold with the intensity of a bear protecting its hive. But whisper this in Manchester or Concord, New Hampshire's syrup producers have long been eyed by their western neighbors as tap bandits, accused of borrowing Vermont's sap under the cover of night. The suspicion isn't just small-town gossip, it's backed by headlines that read like crime thrillers, complete with midnight raids and black market syrup rings. The tension boiled over in 2012 when a brazen heist in Quebec made international news. Millions of dollars worth of syrup vanished from a Canadian warehouse, exposing a shadowy network of thieves funneling stolen sweetness across state lines. Vermont's syrup mafia, yes, that's a real term they embrace, immediately side-eyed New Hampshire, where smaller-scale operations had mysteriously boomed that same year. Funny how their yields spike when our logs show missing taps, grumbled one Vermont farmer to the Burlington Free Press, while New Hampshire producers shot back that Vermont was just mad they couldn't trademark tree sap. The feud turned absurd when a New Hampshire sugar house jokingly posted a sign reading, "No Vermont syrup allowed, we prefer our own bootleg," prompting a Vermont legislator to draft a mock bill classifying syrup theft as a felony punishable by pancake deprivation. What makes this rivalry so deliciously petty is how it mirrors each state's identity. Vermont, with its stringent syrup grading laws and cooperatives that control 80% of America's supply, plays the role of the refined connoisseur. Think of them as the sommeliers of sap. New Hampshire, meanwhile, embraces a scrappier ethos, boasting small-batch artisan syrups with labels that cheekily nod to their outlaw reputation. At farmers' markets along the Connecticut River, you'll find New Hampshire stalls advertising Vermont-adjacent maple magic, while Vermont vendors sniff that their neighbor's product is basically tree water with delusions of grandeur. The rivalry peaks during syrup season when tap tourism becomes a proxy war. Vermont's Maple Open House Weekend lures visitors with promises of authentic syrup tours, while New Hampshire's sugaring off parties lean into rebellion, offering DIY tapping demonstrations with a wink. No cartel oversight here. Social media amplifies the clash syrup gate trends annually, with Vermonters posting photos of tapped trees near the border captioned "Evidence of NH espionage," and Granite Staters retorting with memes of Vermont's Green Mountains labeled Sour Grapes Range. Yet beneath the laughter lies a real economic sting. Vermont's syrup cartel, officially the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association, wields enough influence to sway prices nationwide, leaving smaller New Hampshire producers feeling like David to their Goliath. When a New Hampshire startup began selling Border Hopper Blend syrup aged in whiskey barrels, Vermont's old guard dismissively called it a gimmick, only to quietly launch their own barrel-aged line a year later. The kicker: scientists confirm Vermont's soil and climate do produce slightly higher sugar concentrations in sap, about 2% more than New Hampshire's. But try telling that to a Granite Stater pouring their liberated syrup on a stack of pancakes at a diner in Montpelier. Some rivalries are fought with tariffs or treaties. This one's waged with waffle irons and wood-fired evaporators. And if you listen closely in those maple groves come March, you won't just hear sap dripping, you'll hear the sound of two states refusing to share the sugar shack. The lush orchards of the Pacific Northwest became the unlikely battleground for one of America's strangest agricultural feuds, all thanks to a microscopic menace with a taste for apple trees. When fire blight, a vicious bacterial disease that turns branches into blackened, oozing wrecks swept through the region in the 1920s, Washington and Oregon didn't just brace for crop losses. They launched a full-scale blame game complete with roadside blockades, propaganda campaigns, and accusations of biological sabotage so heated, you'd think the trees themselves had declared war. Washington growers pointed the finger south, insisting Oregon's lax orchard inspections had let the blight creep north like some sort of arboreal Trojan horse. Oregon fired back that Washington's high-density orchards were basically a bacterial buffet, and their neighbors were just looking for a scapegoat. The rhetoric got so wild, one Washington newspaper ran a cartoon showing Oregon apples sneaking across the Columbia River in rowboats labeled Typhoid Marys. Meanwhile, Oregon agricultural agents retaliated by slapping quarantine signs on highways leading into their state, warning Washington orchardists to keep their infected clippings to themselves. Things turned outright theatrical when Washington's governor proposed building an apple curtain, a literal checkpoint where every truckload of Oregon fruit would be inspected by men in white coats wielding flamethrowers to sterilize contaminated crates. Oregon's response: a cheeky public demonstration where their scientists deliberately infected a few trees, then dramatically saved them with copper spray, just to prove Washington's panic was overblown. Local nurseries took sides too, with Washington brands boasting 100% Oregon-free rootstock, while Oregon catalogs touted their trees as blighter-resistant since before it was cool. The feud cooled when federal scientists proved both states shared the blame. The blight had likely hitchhiked on bees and birds long before humans noticed. But the rivalry left a tart aftertaste. To this day, Washington's Apple Marketing Board still subtly trashes Oregon's smaller harvests as boutique crops, while Oregon artisans flaunt their heritage varietals as a dig at Washington's corporate orchards. Drive through Hood River today, and you'll find a faded quarantine sign in someone's barn, preserved like a relic from a phytosanitary Cold War. Some battles leave bullet holes. This one left bacteria stains and a lesson that when it comes to nature's wrath, maybe it's better to share the blame and the pesticides. Drive through the Mississippi Delta and you'll spot roadside stands selling hot tamales wrapped in corn husks, steamy, spicy, and wrapped tight like edible secrets. But cross into Louisiana and suddenly those same tamales come swaddled in parchment paper, their fillings laced with Cajun flair. This isn't just a difference in presentation. It's the front line of a culinary Cold War where two states have spent over a century arguing over who truly owns the Delta's twisted take on a Mexican classic. The feud boils down to migration and improvisation. In the late 1800s, Mexican migrant workers brought tamales to the cotton fields, where black sharecroppers adapted them with locally abundant ingredients, substituting cornmeal for masa, simmering pork in Delta-seasoned broth. But here's where the story splits. Mississippi claims its tamale tradition began in Greenville, where a bluesman-turned-vendor named Hot Tamale Joe allegedly popularized them in juke joints. Louisiana fires back that the dish migrated down river to New Orleans first, where Sicilian immigrants added garlic and cayenne, creating a Creole-Italian hybrid. Proof: both states point to paper trails as flimsy as the husks their tamales are wrapped in. Mississippi's ace is a 1901 newspaper ad for a hot tamale wagon in Clarksdale. Louisiana counters with oral histories of French Quarter Street vendors shouting, "Tamales calients." In the 1890s, the rivalry turned theatrical in 2013 when Mississippi's legislature declared the hot tamale its official state food, prompting Louisiana's tourism board to launch a billboard near the border reading, "Real tamales don't need resolutions." Festivals became battlegrounds. At the annual Delta Hot Tamale Festival in Greenville, judges dock points for excessive Creole influence, while over in Zwol, Louisiana's Tamale Fiesta crowns winners based on spice complexity, a not-so-subtle dig at Mississippi's simpler pepper and meat formula. Social media amplifies the clash. Mississippi partisans post side-by-side photos of husk-wrapped tamales captioned, "Authentic vs. knockoff," while Louisiana chefs retort with videos of their parchment paper bundles unfurling like edible origami, taunting, "Ours don't stick to the wrapper." Beneath the banter lies a deeper cultural rift. Mississippi's tamales are steeped in blues lore. B.B. King famously sang about them in Hot Tamales and the Red Hot Blues, linking the dish to Black resilience. Louisiana's version, meanwhile, reflects its gumbo pot identity, blending Mexican roots with Cajun heat, the most telling sign of the feud's staying power. When a national food chain tried to trademark Delta-style tamales in 2020, attorneys from both states filed oppositions within hours. Some rivalries are fought with tariffs or treaties. This one simmers in cornmeal and cayenne. And if you ask which state does it better, just brace for a mouthful of opinions and maybe a side of comeback sauce. Of all the quirks in American geography, few are as diplomatically awkward as Alaska's panhandle, a narrow strip of coastline that dangles like a taunt toward Canada, cutting off British Columbia from the Pacific Ocean. This wasn't just an accident of plate tectonics. It was the spoils of a high-stakes poker game between empires, one where Canada walked away feeling like they'd been dealt a royal flush only to have the table flipped on them. The drama began in 1825 when Russia and Britain signed a vague treaty drawing a border parallel to the windings of the coast. Fast forward to 1903 and the U.S., having purchased Alaska from Russia, interpreted that poetic phrasing as giving them every fjord and inlet, leaving Canada with mountains that literally crumbled into the sea. The resulting tribunal, stacked with American and British judges, ruled in favor of the U.S., a decision so lopsided that Canadian newspapers howled about betrayal. One particularly salty headline in the Vancouver Daily World sniffed, "We've been swindled out of our seaports by a comma." But here's where it gets juicy. The grudge didn't fade with time. It fermented. Today, Alaskans and British Columbians clash over everything from fishing rights to cruise ship routes, with Canadian fishermen grumbling about Yankee whales, their term for Alaskan boats hogging salmon runs. Hockey games between Alaskan and Canadian teams inevitably feature chants of "give back the coast," even though most players weren't alive when the border was drawn. The pettiness reached peak absurdity in 2018 when a Canadian geocacher planted a fake historical marker near the Alaskan border claiming the land was temporarily on loan. Alaska's tourism board responded by projecting "Thanks for the ocean views" onto a glacier visible from British Columbia. Underneath the theatrics, though, lies real economic tension. That panhandle isn't just scenic. It's a chokehold on shipping lanes. Canadian goods heading to Asia often detour through Alaskan waters, adding millions in transport costs. No wonder a recent poll found that 1 in 3 British Columbians still believes the border should be renegotiated. Yet for all the griping, there's a grudging symbiosis. Alaskan towns like Haida survive entirely on Canadian shoppers. Their grocery store accepts loonies, while British Columbia's ski resorts rely on Anchorage's deep-pocketed tourists. Maybe that's the lesson here. Some borders are drawn in ink, others in salmon runs and snowmobile tracks. And no matter how much Canada side-eyes that panhandle, Alaska isn't giving back the keys to the coastline, no matter how many hockey pucks get thrown in protest. From a pig that nearly triggered an international standoff to honey thieves sparking militia threats, these state rivalries prove America's history is anything but dull. Who knew something as simple as a misspelled burger or a wandering river could ignite decades of spite? Whether it's Michigan and Ohio's swamp versus Paradise trade or Kentucky and Tennessee's bourbon theology debates, these feuds reveal how pride turns even the smallest slights into legendary grudges. And let's not forget the ultimate flex, Georgia still fighting over a 2-century-old survey error just to nab a sip of Tennessee's water. So here's the real question: which rivalry takes the crown for pettiest feud? Was it the cheese war blocking a bridge with trucks, or maybe Nebraska and Colorado's irrigation insults? Drop your vote in the comments. We're betting the debate there will get just as heated as the stories we covered. And if you're craving more offbeat history lessons, hit subscribe. From rogue postmasters to towns that seceded over pizza toppings, we've got plenty of bizarre tales left to unpack. After all, in a country where neighbors feud over syrup theft and gator relocations, the next wild story is always just a state line away.